Good morning. I'm representing the anti-racist designation team, and your bulletin recognizes Natalie Mason also. Unfortunately, she has a sick child this morning and wasn't able to be here, but she helped with this presentation. I want to acknowledge her participation in that. A few weeks ago, we said goodbye to our 39th president, Jimmy Carter. It was evident that throughout his life, he understood what it meant to be a Christian. It's more than professing to believe in Jesus Christ. It's more than acknowledging we are loved beyond our wildest imaginations. Our faith is meant to inspire action. Jesus calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves, speak out for the oppressed and marginalized, and work to mend our broken world. In response to this call, the anti-racist designation team has undergone a multi-year process to learn how we as a church can work toward racial justice in our community. It began with a few people participating in a weekly racial justice book group. And after years of reading, learning, and unlearning, several of the participants began to explore how we could become a designated anti-racist congregation. The Reverend Dr. Velda Love from the UCC National Office led the group in months-long training via Zoom. In April of 2023, she came to Countryside and led a weekend workshop on anti-racism. Our church council at the time, staff, and anti-racist designation team all participated in this workshop. In February of last year, we led an all-church book read of Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Many of you participated in that. Our youth service trip last year was a historic tour of the civil rights sites of the South. All this work led to a task force creating the anti-racist covenant that you see in your bulletin today. You'll find it in the back if you haven't seen it yet, which was approved by our church council just this past November. I'm not going to read the whole covenant to you, but I do want to highlight some things, so if you would please turn to it in the back of your bulletin. I am going to read the intro because I think it's important. Countryside Community Church pledges to continue the ongoing work of anti-racism. We collectively and individually commit to actively understand, identify, and dismantle racism, including in ourselves, both conscious and unconscious. We are inspired by the example of Jesus, grounded by the Holy Spirit, to be engaged in self-reflection, grow in awareness of systems of power and oppression, and challenge the status quo of white privilege and systemic racism so that all may experience love, safety, belonging, dignity, and equity. And so when we wrote the covenant, we chunked it into what we thought were three important parts. And the first is that we acknowledge. We acknowledge white supremacy and our participation in it. And the reason acknowledge is important is we can't change our hearts and our minds if we haven't first acknowledged. So acknowledge is first. We then promise to transform, change our hearts and minds, and finally then to take action, because that's what our faith calls us to do. This covenant is not meant solely for the Social Justice Board. It's meant to be embraced and infused into the life of this church. We are so fortunate to have a senior minister, Pastor Jenny, who has been so supportive of this process in her time with us. And I want to acknowledge that. Her support has meant the world to us and has helped us to continue and really was important in the writing of this covenant. Secondly, I want to also say, and I think Sarah may be talking about it in a bit, but on February 2nd, which is next week, the adult ed session is going to be the whole anti-racist team. I'm not leading that. The whole team will be leading that session after church. First, though, after church, we have a small volunteer fair, because if you're looking for a way to take action in these frustrating times, we're trying to provide that for you. So there will be a small volunteer fair with about 4 different community organizations in Omaha that serve our immigrant families. And so you can get information and look for ways to take action. And then following that, join us in the chapel. And let's have a conversation about how we can be an anti-racist church and what that looks like. I'd like to conclude with a quote from this book, and I'm also selling this book, How to Fight Racism, Courageous Christianity and the Journey Toward Racial Justice by Jamar Tisby. This is the book our Sunday Morning Racial Justice book group is currently reading, and it's a wonderful book. And anyway, here's the quote. "The church is more than a place. The church is a people whose love for God compels them to act on behalf of their neighbors. Racial justice comes from the struggle of a small but committed group of people who choose courageously to stand against racism rather than compromise with it. Courageous Christianity dares to love through action and to risk everything for the sake of justice. This call is more important than ever in a time such as this." Thank you.